Hello and welcome to Editor's Pick, a War Elephant podcast, episode 19. I'm your host Ian, and I have with me
Jaedon.
So we have several news stories to run through this week, and we look forward to your comments and any feedback you might have. Feel free to leave comments on YouTube or email us at, I think, warelephantpod@gmail.com. We also, of course, have the Discord community at in the show notes, and the Quora community space. All of these are linked in the show notes. Feel free to join and go through the verification process, and we'll have lots of immediate feedback, community discussion, and interesting information from a center-right or right-wing perspective. We are, of course, open to any members and any comments as long as they follow our 3 R's: respectful, researched, and relaxed. So without further ado, let's get started on our topics. Our first one is a Newsweek article by Patrick Brown, who apparently is a think tank member, who writes that conservatives who are looking for a new direction after Trump should embrace family policy options. So this is similar to some of the things like common good conservatism that Tucker Carlson and Marco Rubio have been proposing, sort of abandoning fiscal responsibility in favor of using large spending and large government to promote social institutions that conservatives think are valuable. So in this case, the family, specifically married men and women with children, with things like the Earned Income Tax Credit, school choice vouchers, other options on public education, and support for single-income families. I think that this is certainly more worthwhile than proposing more and more business-oriented reforms. Not that I am against business-oriented reforms, but given what we call woke capital, large companies certainly are no friends to freedom anymore, nor have they been promoting virtue for quite some time. What do you think, Jaedon?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree. A lot of the things that when it comes to our culture start in the home. We need to be more focused on improving the lives of families, especially younger families, which are honestly in a very bleak state today. We're seeing levels of single motherhood at absolutely catastrophic rates that 20, 30, 40 years ago would have been considered absolutely ridiculous. Like it's it's at a point where we don't really know what we're doing as a culture. We need to figure out how to improve the lives of everyone instead of trying to improve the abilities of businesses to do what we would have thought. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I think you're right. I think that there's been so much energy spent destroying the idea of the family in entertainment and in education. Um, Sometimes for good reasons. I mean, the idea that a two-parent committed family is a fix-all for problems is mistaken. There's certainly many horrors and abuses that can be perpetrated by a two-parent family, but I think that statistics show that even though there are certainly still problems that are going to occur to a society where two-parent family is the norm, um, other arrangements are statistically simply nowhere close. Like attempting to replace it, as the Black Lives Matter movement explicit. No, sorry, not the Black Lives Matter movement. The Black Lives Matter organization explicitly calls for the destruction of the traditional family, but that is not what I think the Black Lives Matter movement believes. It's just that their organization was hijacked by self-avowed Marxists, and they call themselves trained Marxists, and so there's a very explicit goal that they've embraced that goes counter to a lot of black people's actual desires. So I
I
think it would.
absolutely
Yeah, go ahead.
I actually absolutely agree, and I would like to add on to that part about Black Lives Matter organization, I would not actually say that the organization was hijacked by self-avowed Marxists. It was started by those Marxists. This was their plan from the very beginning, arguing for cultural Marxism from a position which anyone, if they oppose, would be called racist. And that's absolutely the biggest problem. And a lot of people, I obviously can't speak for everyone, but there's a lot of people that do realize that the biggest problem for the black community is single parenthood. A lot of children grow up without a father figure in their lives. And that is the number one reason for a lot of the problems in inner city black culture. And that's one of the things that this organization is defending, despite it being probably the root cause of a lot of problems nationwide.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of goofed when I spoke about the organization versus the movement. I meant that the organization kind of hijacked the movement. The organization has
Okay, yeah.
always been led by these very partisan and I would say destructive figures. But the movement, is a genuine movement trying to bring attention to the injustice that black people feel. And I think it's a little more complicated than what you might hear on slogans like cops are hunting down black people. I don't think that's true, but I think that there is a tension between black people and cops that doesn't need to be there. And I think that it has to be a two-way street to solve that problem. So that's kind of what I meant when I talked about the organization versus the movement.
Absolutely.
So let's move on to our second point, which of course is the impeachment, which I believe has concluded now.
Yep. They voted to acquit President or former President Donald Trump. They did not get the 2/3 majority required to impeach the former president. It would be a very bad precedent. This entire system's been a bad precedent with this impeachment today. But yes, it failed, and the Democrats really did not know what they were doing.
Well, I don't
This
know.
article here,
Yeah, go ahead.
yeah, this National Review article, it's titled "Democrats Squander Their Impeachment Trial Moment." It basically argues that the Democrat impeachment trial did not take the necessary steps to prove without a shadow of a doubt that Trump, as they claim, incited an insurrection. One of the reasons that a lot of Republicans actually voted to acquit was because they didn't have any evidence presented. All the witnesses were dismissed.
I don't know. It does really feel like both impeachments were. It didn't feel good faith to me. Um,
Yeah.
and I wonder. I think that you and I, Jaedon, at least, would agree that in the Ukraine phone call and in the way he handled the January 6th riots, President Trump acted badly. Um, would you agree with that?
I would not say that he was necessarily an angel. Well, let's put it that way.
But I would not think, even though I think both of them are certainly bad, I don't think that they are impeachable. Um, Now, to be fair, my standard of impeachment is lied under oath with former President Clinton. And honestly, looking back at that now, I'm not sure it was wise for the Republicans to impeach President Clinton either. Um, I don't
I
know.
would definitely, yes, I would definitely agree with that sentiment. I think it was a bit of a partisan motivated attack on the sitting president. And while I think that it was an actual use of impeachment, he did lie under oath, and that's a
Well,
pretty
and he
high crime.
also, abused his authority and having sex with a
Yep.
woman who's younger than his daughter who was working for him. Like, all of that is
Yep.
true. I'm not at all defending President Clinton, but I wonder if impeachment was an appropriate thing. And certainly politically, it would have been really bad if Al Gore had been, become president for the last 2 years, because then he almost certainly would have won. And, you know,
Yep.
you have to think about these things strategically. I mean, I
Yep.
don't know. I
Well,
don't
there's
like the way
yep.
impeachment's been handled in my lifetime. So,
I would agree. There would have been severe repercussions. There were severe repercussions for the Republicans even back then. But one thing that is actually very concerning for me is that the Democrats today are not seeing the severe repercussions the Republicans did back then.
I mean,
I
they
think a lot of
are,
it.
though, because even though they won the presidency, they didn't do so with like it wasn't a landslide. Like, okay, they got
That is
10
true.
million more views, but in terms of like the margins they got in the states that were crucial to winning, it wasn't a landslide. And in terms of state legislatures and governorships, they still haven't gotten a landslide there, and they're getting ever closer to losing the House after the blue wave, and it really was a blue wave in the House in 2018. So they lost quite a bit, even though Trump handed them the Senate. I do think there actually have been political consequences. Not as much as I, of course, wish, but I don't think they're getting away with this scot-free.
That's a good point. We still are within the next few weeks of this event. We really have yet to see the full impact of this decision on the part of the Democrats, where this will lead. But I am very concerned about how much of a stranglehold the Democratic Party has on the mainstream narrative when it comes to politics, especially in the media.
Yeah.
So all these organizations that will toe the Democratic Party line.
Well, and it's not just
their narrative.
the media. I mean, it's the social media and the way that.
Yep.
I mean, we talked about this last time, of course, with the Time magazine article, and how if we had said something like, we really doubt the fairness of this election just 3 weeks ago, we would have been, our tweets would have been, you couldn't respond to the tweets or like them or retweet them. Like, they would have arbitrarily made them isolated. But, Time magazine brags about it not being a fair election. Now, of course, they think it is fair because they got the desired outcome, and that's a direct quote. They kept saying they protected the desired outcome or the right outcome of the election. But
proper outcome. Yep.
Right, exactly. It's that's more disturbing to me than the media, because I mean, at this point we kind of expect the media to be full of complete liars, but our ability to speak out against that being actually restricted for no factual reason by social media is very disturbing. And I don't know. I mean, I don't like the fact that we had complete control of a government for 2 years, from 2016 to 2018, and Congress did absolutely nothing to reform Section 230 or, clarify. I mean, and even though the Republicans had the Senate and held lots of committees and forced social media company heads to come to Washington and make testimony, they didn't do anything meaningful. I mean, it's embarrassing that Republicans, even when they had power, they did not do anything except grandstand about social media when they really needed to make consequences for abuses of power by the companies.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. The lack of total movement on the entire 2 years is, in hindsight, quite surprising to me, with all the huffing, but at the same time it really isn't. They don't really want to fix things, because if they fix things then they have nothing to run on. That's just politics in general.
Yeah. And kind of segueing from that, we had a bunch of stories in the last couple of weeks on the New York Times. I think most people on the right certainly think that the New York Times is dishonest and unhelpful as a news source. But on the left, it's still used as the source, as the agenda setter for most newspapers and even you know, news magazine shows on TV. What the New York Times says is still considered notable, and I think that the left can support the New York Times, but I wish they wouldn't do things like hire a completely just bankrupt person like Taylor Lawrence to post about tweets and try and get people fired for no good reason. Um, and then the editor, Dean Baquet, just sort of backs Taylor Lawrence up and gets people fired and says really stupid things like intent doesn't matter when you're talking about, um, you know, saying you fired someone for using a racial slur. When, context does matter when you're saying, well, no, it's not right to use the racial slur. And if you use it, now, of course, maybe it's better if you choose not to use the racial slur when you're saying it's bad to use it. But saying intent doesn't matter is ridiculous.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. The hypocrisy within the media when it comes to who they hire and who they fire over absolutely ridiculous standards is both shocking and not shocking.
Yeah,
As
I'm
I
thinking
keep
back,
saying.
about 10 years ago, I would talk on internet forums about movies and comic books, and people would be really free to just say things, both liberals and conservatives. There's a lot more of a sense of, I can say things and people might get mad, but there's a sense that it's okay to say them. And now there's a real sense of fear of lack of employment and stuff, and I'm all in favor of people being respectful. I mean, it's one of our guiding principles at the War Elephant is we're not supposed to just shoot our mouths off and be disrespectful, but we're also trying to be honest and explore ideas, trying to find the truth. And it feels like things like what's going on at the New York Times are explicitly anti-truth, and that worries me.
Yep, I agree.
All right, why don't we move on to our next item?
So this one is basically the culmination of a story that's been around since May or so. When did this happen? When did this start?
Oh, I mean, I think
Yeah,
it
last
was
May.
big last summer when the quote
Yep.
unquote whistleblower came out.
Yep. So back in May, a woman who worked in a hospital, or rather the Florida Department of Health, was fired because she claimed that the Department of Health was ordered by the governor's office to fudge with the COVID statistics, saying there were less COVID cases than there really were. And of course, came out just a couple weeks ago definitively that she's been lying this entire time. And if you check her Twitter feed, it's been getting increasingly deranged over the last several months. But this narrative was around even before she came out with this breaking news from this whistleblower. It was something I would consider to be confirmation bias on the side of the left when it came to the mainstream media and their narrative that DeSantis, a Republican governor, could not possibly be doing this good with COVID. And
Yeah.
even early on, the facts were contradicting the narrative, but it was the confirmation bias was so strong they completely ignored the facts in favor of believing something that was quite clearly demonstrably false.
I when we were prepping for the podcast, I took a look at the Google News feed about Governor DeSantis, and it really seems like there's a determined effort to destroy this man. And I'm not certainly going to say he's perfect, but I think it's shameful the way they've embraced politics of personal destruction, just everything. And I know that the right certainly has its targets that we personally dislike, like, of course, Alexandria Ocasio Cortez and the other members of the squad and other people. And I certainly have criticisms of my own governor, Governor Walz of Minnesota, because he has not his daughter posted information supporting rioters last summer, and I think that's
Yep.
completely unacceptable from elected officials' family unless he makes it clear that. Well, I mean, she was posting official information from police stations, like where officers were going to be, to let rioters know, and I just think that's completely unacceptable. But I think that just a relentless personal attack on someone is completely beyond the bounds of civil discourse. I certainly would support all legitimate criticism of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but I think that, for example, going after her private life and just speculating on, any kind of, personal attacks on Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez that aren't part of her public posting is something I think is just not acceptable. And I hope that we try and hold ourselves to that standard, but it's really tempting sometimes when you look at the vitriol directed at someone like Governor DeSantis, because this whistleblower is almost exactly like Michael Avenatti, who was seriously considered by the media as a presidential candidate until he was revealed as just an abusive and dishonest and literally a thief. But he was on all these cable news shows, and people treated him with respect. This whistleblower is the same thing. It's like, because this whistleblower attacks someone they personally hate, they believe her, despite the fact that she's been completely proved to be dishonest. And
Yep.
I'm just so frustrated by that.
Yeah, I would always say that confirmation bias is a very dangerous path that we need to be wary that we're not going down. Because if we allow ourselves, anyone with principle at all, it doesn't have to be conservatives, it doesn't have to be liberals, because both can be drawn to grifters like this.
Absolutely.
I would point to like Lynn Wood and Sidney Powell. They were probably the worst of the
Or, of
grifters
course,
on the right.
the Lincoln Project, who have spectacularly imploded over the last 2 weeks.
Oh
they
man,
they got something like $52 million, most of which went into their own pockets.
Yep. Just the amount of grift in the last few years has been quite incredible to watch, but also quite terrifying, because there are so many people willing to hear what they want to hear instead of what they need to hear. They need to hear the truth, not what confirms your beliefs.
Yeah,
that's what I would say.
I mean, and if you ever listen to people who really know how political organizing is done, I recommend checking out David Hines on Twitter. There's also Jonah Goldberg's done some really good talking to Republican organizers on his podcast, The Remnant. I definitely recommend checking both of them out. There's just so many people who posture on the right and say, I support President Trump, pay money to me, and I'll make sure President Trump gets supported. But actually that money, again, goes straight into their pockets. And so we really need to focus on building honest institutions and finding and supporting honest institutions to make our society a more well-functioning place. Our second to last story, actually, I think it's going to be our last story because we already touched on Lynn Wood. Our last story is a New York Times, Baltimore Sun reporting on a Texas story. Now, Texas, of course, is known as a red state, but their attorney general is extremely progressive. And she has decided to prosecute someone who is already, the charges against this doctor were dropped. This doctor had 10 doses of the COVID vaccine, and it was after hours. No one was scheduled to get him, and he was required to destroy them. And so he got together as many people as he could and vaccinated 10 people with these doses. And he was fired for this, and the DA of this city is persecuting him. She's attempting to destroy his life. And this man is a Pakistani immigrant. He's been practicing medicine for like 20 years. He's apparently just a really good guy, and he really wanted to get this vaccine out there. And I think that, honestly, I would say this man is heroic in trying not to waste this thing that we're trying to fight this pandemic, and we're wasting time, wasting government resources, hurting people who tried to save. I mean, he gave it to these people who he didn't know, and some people he did know. So his wife got the last dose of the vaccine because one person didn't show up, and his wife has a respiratory disease. But he also gave it to an 80-year-old woman and a 70-year-old woman. It's all these people who were in the target range who needed the vaccine, and this progressive district attorney is just trying to ruin his life using state money. And I don't understand how you get to this place.
Wokeness.
Yeah, but
it's
this guy is a Pakistani immigrant.
Yep.
Can't we use the wokeness to defend his heroism at least? And it's just, I don't get it.
It doesn't fit the narrative. The fact that he vaccinated a group which is disproportionately white is the reason that he's getting prosecuted.
But he mostly did Indian and Pakistani people because those are the people in his circle.
Yeah, who knows? Who knows?
I don't understand what they think they're doing. Oh my goodness. I just pray that we will get to a better place with vaccines so that people aren't having to, risk their careers to save people with this thing. So,
yeah.
Any last thoughts, Jaedon?
Not anymore. No, I think I covered just about everything I wanted to say.
Okay, well, thank you so much for joining me. I thank you guys for listening. Again, subscribe, leave us comments on the YouTube, send us emails, or, of course, join our Discord or our Quora community. This has been Ian and Jaedon for Editor's Pick, a War Elephant podcast. We'll talk to you again next week.